Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us. This is the third evening of Resplendent Explained, and my name is Susan Murray. I'm the chair of the Darts Hill Garden Conservancy Trust Society, which is the host of this evening, and also the Resplendent temporary art installation that is taking place until the end of July in Darts Hill Garden Park. Tonight we have our artists from Resplendent who are here to talk to us about the work that they have put together in the garden. Alex McClune is our moderator, and we will hand things over to Alex, and he will smoothly and beautifully, as he did in the preceding two evenings, shepherd us through this evening of discussion and presentations. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. To start us off this evening, I'm going to rudely mute you all like this. However, you can still turn your sound on when you want. It'll be either in the bottom left corner if you're on a Windows machine, or if you're on an Apple machine, I think it's at the top. And we can also, Susan and I as hosts, can also turn on your microphone by clicking. We can't turn it on ourselves. We can ask you to unmute, and then you'll have something pop up inviting you to do so. But please don't until we are having questions at the end. This way we don't get any feedback as we move through. We'll hear from 4 artists tonight, and they'll be speaking about their art and the things you can currently see at Darts Hill Garden Park. But before we begin, I'd like to introduce someone who will introduce Zinc Artist Collective, which is not Cora Lee-Leger tonight. Tonight will be introduced by Willa Downing. So first I'll do this. I'll put a spotlight on Willa, which means that you'll all see her. And I'll just give you a brief introduction, not her full bio, before she takes it away. Willa is a longtime volunteer at Darts Hill Garden Park. She's a scientist, a biochemist actually, and a visual artist, and an installation artist. She is the current artist in residence at the garden, where you can see her recent installation, Wood Wide Web. Willa, why don't you introduce? Now we hear you, Willa.
Pardon? Oh, is that okay?
Yes, now we hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. Zinc Artist Collective grew out of some open drawing meetings to connect with a community of artists in South Surrey. Several of the artists decided that we wanted to work on some projects together. Projects that, oops, my screen just went. Projects that might take us outside our customary individual realms of practice. Over the years, we have done a variety of projects, such as transforming a moving truck into a mobile gallery, setting mannequin torsos in the tidal zone at Crescent Beach, and dressing vacant store windows in Newton. In 2018, we proposed a temporary art exhibition at Darts Hill Garden. Unlike previous arts at Darts exhibitions, where artists had booths to display and sell artwork, this was not to be art at the garden, but rather art in the garden. Called 7.5 Acres, it was held on one rather rainy weekend in April, but nevertheless proved to be a successful experience for both Zinc and Darts Hill Garden. In 2019, Zinc members invited other artists to join. The second exhibition, called Understory, was extended to a month. For the participating artists, this was an opportunity to explore diverse ways of working in an amazing garden environment. For Darts Hill, this was an opportunity to bring some new visitors into the garden. As we plan to install our third exhibition, Resplendent, in 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic hit. The exhibition was subsequently postponed to the following year, which brings us to now. Over the course of waiting and planning, we were excited to learn that the board has developed a new artist in residence program, as well as allowing us to present Resplendent at last. We wish to thank Darts Hill Garden Conservancy Trust Society and the City of Surrey Cultural Grants Program for their support. Thank you.
Thank you, Willa. Now I'll introduce each artist in turn, and they'll do their presentations. And if you have any questions or thoughts come up that you are listening to our artists, hang on to them because we'll have time to chat all together at the end. Our first presenter this evening is Claire Moore, and let me read you a bio so you can learn a little bit about her before she begins her presentation. Claire Moore is a multimedia artist who grew up and studied in South Africa. She has spent most of her art-making life juggling teaching, community art projects, and artistic collaborations. She currently works part-time at the Surrey Art Gallery and is in the midst of 2 outdoor projects with communities in Surrey. Claire was the artist in residence at Darts during the spring and summer of 2020. She particularly enjoyed having the time to examine the myriad small details of natural growth in the garden and practice the art of slow looking. Slow progress has been a feature of her weaving practice as well. Creating the piece that is in the garden has taught her a lot about sheltering in place, staying the course, and exploring connections. Claire, go ahead.
Hi, and thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here amongst fellow artists and others. So the piece I have in the garden at the moment is called Conversations with Ivy, and it was over a year in the making, and throughout that whole year of making, I was never quite sure if it was going to reach like any kind of finality at all, because the weaving sort of started as a kind of haptic distraction to COVID when when the pandemic first sort of hit us. I found myself looking for things to do with my hands. And so through a chance encounter with someone in Vancouver over a plant dyeing workshop, I discovered that you can weave with ivy. And I thought, well, there you go. There's nothing to be lost by weaving with ivy. There's enough of it around. So I started. And that kind of was a project that led into a residency at Darts. And so I spent at least a month, I can't remember now, sometime in the summer of 2020 when no one else was really around, in the garden. And I filled a whole sketchbook. So I kind of have it with me. This is sort of the sketchbook of explorations and studies that I did in the garden. But I'm going to share my screen just so that you can see some of those pictures. So here we go, a screen share. Let's hope it works. Okay. There you go. Are you all just seeing one slide? Or the moderator can, there's a thumbs up from Susan, so I'm assuming that's the case. I'm just not sure how to advance my pictures, but maybe we'll get an arrow. I might have to go back to this every time. So hopefully not. However, this was kind of the very beginnings. This was a couple of spokes that were just suckers that I cut off a tree. And then those sort of developed into bent structures. And I discovered that there was something happening whereby I could impose my will on the weaving up to a point, and then there was a point at which the materials imposed their will on me. So from the get-go, I was having some kind of a conversation with my materials. So they kind of grew and developed into this kind of wavy system that moved across my lawn. I was intentional about that because I wanted to echo I wanted to imply a connection to what was going on underground. I think we have a tendency to look at surface, and I'm thinking of the ocean as well, without much regard to what's going on underneath the surface. And now that we've had, studies by Suzanne Simard at UBC, who's done research on sort of the mycorrhizal systems that connect tree roots to each other underground, we know a lot more about what's going on down there. So this was kind of installed in the garden during my residency, and I had this side event going on whereby people could try out some weaving with ivy in the grass. But at the same time, I was moving through the garden on the days when the public wasn't there and drawing, and my focus was absolutely trees. So I was interested in tree bark, trees themselves. I was interested in the growth patterns of trees. Things seem to repeat themselves. Quite often there were these growth patterns that happened in certain arrays of numbers. I found that it's not difficult to be in the garden and be completely awestruck by the complexity of what you're witnessing, that there's sort of a code underneath everything that is predicting a whole life and a growth that has some kind of biological imperative. And that's just what you're witnessing above ground, that underneath there's a whole another story going on. So I did spend a lot of time with trees and tree bark when I was in the garden. This should be horizontal, should be vertical. It's that Scots pine at the bottom of the garden. And I really sort of, remembered that fascination with tree bark and growth patterns. And although my sort of ultimate wrap up of my residency at Dart's concerned itself with kind of taxonomy and our sort of pyramidal Western taxonomy that we rely on to navigate the natural world, you can see at the top of this kind of illustrated map, I have a sentence that says, "Meet the trees, airs and graces, and subterranean mazes." And I really did feel that by the end of the residency, I was getting a sense of individual trees, almost like the personality of tree. And so that was kind of a breakthrough, of a real recognition of a different species of life that had its own agenda and its own history and its own spot in this web. That was interesting. But my residency ended and I brought my pieces home. I tried to persuade my husband to pose with them and use them as a metaphor for so many years of marriage. He was reluctant but agreeable eventually. And then I picked it up again and started weaving pieces together to try and mimic the kind of growth of tree bark. And so I spent some time on that for the rest of the summer, but then the fall hit and I moved it inside to my studio. And there it languished a little until the winter ended and I brought it outside again. And by then it had grown to a point where it sort of formed this shape that had a lilt. It was kind of leaning over to one side and I wasn't sure why, but in order to compensate, I had to anchor it on one side and let it grow out the other. So ultimately, the whole lesson was about listening to the material and having it do what it wanted to do within certain parameters. So if you look at it from a different angle, let's see it here, you can see that because it had grown this way, I don't know if you can see my sort of cursor, it had to be counterbalanced this way and allowed to grow out that way. And so this counterbalancing I managed by staking it into the ground with bamboo, which some people pointed out to me created this rather alien character, which is fitting because of the its status as an alien species and its reputation as an enemy alien. So before I end, I just want to talk about two little sort of aha moments, epiphanies, takeaway things I got out of the project. One was my relationship to extracting natural resources. I had gone at it sort of hell-bent with this idea that ivy was a menace, and it was so much of it, and I could just take as much as I liked and it wouldn't matter. And I did certainly towards the end have a moment of realization that that's a kind of colonial attitude to resource extraction that has got us into the mess we're currently in. And so I certainly had this big moment of reflection. I was in the ravine, I was thinking about it. I was also looking at the amount of junk people have thrown into ravines. I guess because they believe once it's gone over the edge, it's invisible. I was enjoying the extent to which the ivy had colluded in almost masking the garbage. But I was also interested in the fact that when I came out of the ravine, I was faced with two cedar trees and some graffiti below it that was questioning my intent. That's me. I'm going to wait till the end to find out if there are questions. I just hope I haven't exceeded my time. Thank you.
I'm sure there will certainly be questions. Claire, thank you so much. And Susan, I may disappear during our next presentation because I see Elizabeth is back. Can you hear us, Elizabeth? Give a nod if you can hear us. Wonderful. Okay, her mic is off, but she can hear us now. Excellent. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to introduce to you a figure that you have already met, I'm sure, someone that we've already seen a couple evenings. This is, and I'll give you your full introduction this time, Cora Lilager, a visual artist living in South Surrey, BC. After earning a BFA from the University of Minnesota, she attended the Banff Center School of Fine Arts. Later, Cora completed graduate studies in art therapy and had an active career as an expressive therapist with children, families, and the elderly. Now retired from that profession, her present art practice involves drawing and bookmaking, as well as intensive handiwork projects that reflect a desire for quietude and meditative ways of engaging with the world. Several permanent collections in the Pacific Northwest region include her works. Cora fondly dedicates her work in Dart's Garden to her late husband, Don, who was an accomplished artist, an expert gardener, and a deep inspiration. Cora, welcome again.
Thank you. I'm unmuted, am I?
You are good to go.
I'm going to share my screen. Oh dear. This always happens to me. Can you all see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Great. So my piece is called Nothing Straightforward on a Circuitous Journey. And it's the pine needle piece underneath the large Shirafugan cherry tree between the orchard and Marcus's wave sculpture, which was discussed last week. To better understand my process, which to some may appear rather obsessive, I can share a couple of images of drawings that I have done. Whoops, let's see if I can do this. This one is called Murder of Crows. inspired by witnessing a very large gathering rising and landing in South Langley. This piece is called Language of Snow Geese, inspired by the sounds and overwhelming numbers of snow geese passing through Boundary Bay. I am awed by sheer numbers, swarms, multitudes. As you can see, I respond through iterative making of very simple marks, which, like the herds or flocks, collectively seem to produce a whole that is larger than the sum of its simple parts, so to speak. I am also interested in Eastern philosophy and Buddhism in particular. The simple but laborious processes of repeated mark making, gestures, or actions, instead of being tedious, allows my art making to hold the feeling of a true practice, opening my inner space to be here now rather than the focus of an end goal of a finished product. In the winter of 2017, early 2018, in preparation for the first zinc exhibition at Darts, I walked through Darts Garden several times to try to imagine what kind of art I would want to do there. I found myself immediately attracted to these tightly curled rhododendron leaves that had fallen to the ground in large numbers, which I could gather to reconfigure in a way that would, through some kind of iterated process, transform the simple single leaves into a greater whole. After some experimentation, trial and error, I came upon using thread to tie long strands of the rolled leaves, stem to end, and hanging them from circular templates to form an illusion of tree trunks. The resultant piece was entitled Apparition. In the making of this, I discovered what a joy it was to work with these found natural materials, which will easily compost back to the earth rather than producing objects that become more stuff, possessions to be commodified, stored, or otherwise dealt with. At the end of 2018, I felt keen to work on another piece. This time, I found a rather large cache of fine pine needles dropped at the base of the weeping eastern white pine along the west side of the fence, or the west fence of the site. After gathering bags of needles, I then had to invent a way to use them. As the fine needles seemed quite delicate, I researched preservation methods and came upon cooking the needles in a glycerin bath to preserve their pliability and color. Again, through much trial and error, I came upon tying them with threads into bundles of 21, which happens to be a significant number in Tibetan Buddhist tradition, often being the number of mantra repetitions in meditation practices and the number of beads on a mala or rosary. This repeated act of tying became a form of meditative practice, which allowed me to confront and enjoy this mountain of collected pine needles without feeling overwhelmed. I had initially planned to present this piece in the Zinc and Friends 2019 Understory exhibition at Darts Garden. However, as life and death would have it, my husband, Don, sadly became gravely ill with a brain tumor and died that spring. I put all of the pine needles I had gathered, many of them already tied into bundles, into boxes, not knowing when I would have the heart or where I would have the opportunity to exhibit this work. Then Zinc proposed Resplendent, which was to be another exhibition in the garden in 2020. Largely as an act of mourning and personal therapy, I took out the box of needles and became immersed in tying bundles once again. But then, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic came along and Resplendent was postponed for a year. However, this time I kept tying most of the pine needles into bundles and later put them back into the boxes once again. Which brings us to Resplendent 2021. While I had played a little with setting out the needles in my own garden, I really had little idea of what the final configuration would look like. As with Sophie's words last week about the value of play, in good faith, I decided to let the needles speak and allowed them to fall into a configuration that followed their nature. As you can see, these fine pine needles have a natural curve, and by laying the bundles side by side, they produce arcs of their own size and degree. By flipping adjacent bundles, I found that I could reverse the curvature and thus create a line, which brought to my mind a circuitous path. I was struck by Polly's words last week when she said that the piece she had thought to present in 2020, when the pandemic caused this exhibition to be postponed, did not feel resonant with her current state of mind as Resplendent was to materialize this year. Thus, her present lovely Adventures in Wonderland came to be. But for me, this was a very different experience, as the unforeseen life-changing events of my husband's death, the arrival of the pandemic, and my adult children and their significant others coming to live in my home have all seemed to make the idea of a circuitous life journey more and more salient for me. As with Jan's and my other work in the exhibition, which you'll see later tonight, of course, the unstoppable hand of nature has had its way with the piece. Shown in this short video clip is a pleasant surprise where the sunlight, shadows, and breeze appear to animate the circuitous path. But now the once smooth and more uniform needles have started to dry and curl. A mole has come to visit, leaving some telltale piles of dirt in the circular bed. Wind has at times dislocated some of the bundles, as well as covering the piece with fallen blossoms and leaves over several weeks. I have taken to come to the garden each Thursday in advance of the weekend visitors to tidy the bed and check on the state of my work. While not as dramatic as the nest of baby bunnies under Marcus's sculpture, I do have mushrooms now growing firmly lodged between some of the pine needles. 1 week after a soaking rainfall and winds, it appeared that the circuitous journey might have to come to an end. However, I've begun to introduce another pine needle element. This time, very large and robust needles gathered from the base of the coulter pine at the south fence of the garden. Also tied into bundles of 21, I am in the process of laying these new companion elements to see what the piece might become. As I will be at the garden for a residency throughout the month of July, I may find a good opportunity to continue my process, my practice, and see where the circuitous journey will lead. Thanks. Nope. How do I get off this? I can't seem to end this thing. Oh, there.
Oh, there we go.
Thank you. Sorry, Alex.
Thank you so much, Cora. I'm doing a little bit of work in the background, pardon me, folks, getting things set for Elizabeth, our final presenter this evening. But let me introduce to you now a collaboration effort as well with our next artist. Jan, I'm going to spotlight you so everyone can see as you speak. And now let me introduce you. Ladies and gentlemen, Jan Storer. Jan has had a lifelong interest in nature. She especially loves to notice small details and to find suggested movement in fallen branches and detritus, and the beauty in skeletal remains of leaves and plants. She looks to discover how plant life can delight us, even long after what is usually considered its best before date. For over 25 years, Jan has shared her love of nature and of exploratory gardening with school children. Previously, weaving was a big part of Jan's life, and she especially enjoyed working with torn strips of fabric. However, the flying dust particles from working with the cloth strips has put weaving on the back burner. So Jan was excited when Cora asked her to collaborate with her on this plant weaving project. No dust! It brought her love of weaving and her love of plant materials together. Now to tell us about it, Jan.
Thank you, Alex. How's my volume? Is that okay?
That's just fine. We can all hear you.
All right.
Alex, I am going to need to share my screen in order to see the slides. Is that going to be okay?
Yeah, you can share your screen while Jan is speaking. That should work just fine.
Okay, let me just, oh dear. Okay, it's just going to take me a moment here. I've got the wrong PowerPoint here. Sorry, Jan.
No problem.
How do we get off this? Oh dear, I'm having technical difficulties here. I can't seem to get off this.
I could start talking if you want. Well, you want me to do that, Cora?
Yeah, I think I've got it now. Just a sec. I just couldn't. I am sorry. This is embarrassing. Okay, slideshow. Okay, can you see that?
We're not seeing it right now, Cora.
Oh, I gotta share my screen, I guess. Just a
Susan's
minute.
got the big.
Okay, we are a patient crowd here.
All right, just a minute. I just need to share the screen. Okay.
Now we're cooking. Jan, please
I
go
just
ahead.
have to go-
Thanks, Cora.
Oh dear, just a minute. I'm going the wrong way.
Of course, it all worked perfectly when we practiced, right?
What, I'm sorry, Jen, it's because
no.
I had my other thing going on here. There we go. Sorry.
I'm totally fine with this.
All right, we're good now. Go ahead.
Okay, so I will be speaking on behalf of Cora as well as myself, and Cora will be the slide meister and will interject along the way. Our piece is titled Homage, but as an aside, we have somewhat struggled with the pronunciation of our title. English, homage, French, hommage. There's even a YouTube video about this. You may call it what you wish. We can leave that to you. I'm very grateful to be invited as a guest of Zinc and to be part of Resplendent. Cora and I are grateful to Darts Hill Garden for this wonderful opportunity, and to Ken Warren, who's been amazingly helpful and accommodating in our frequent foraging expeditions. But I'm especially grateful to Cora for asking me to collaborate with her on a garden installation idea. It has been and continues to be quite a journey in many respects, and I'm so happy to be on this journey with her. We've been friends for over 40 years, and this is one of the few times we've been able to work on an art project together. Cora's original idea was to weave plants into squares and to assemble the squares into the concept of a blanket. Cora, I don't think the slides are moving. We seem stuck on one slide. Is that true?
Really? Oh dear.
We're stuck on we didn't see the
Oh,
first.
I see. Just a minute.
We didn't see the first.
Okay, I see what's the matter. Okay.
There we are. Okay.
Okay, now let's try it again. Can you
Okay.
see that?
There we go. And then, yeah, okay. So Cora's original idea was to weave plants into squares and to assemble the squares into the concept of a blanket. Since beginning to work on the project of weaving plant materials, there has been continuous change. We've loved the whole process, especially working with each other. We've loved wandering and foraging at Darts, observing, discovering, making plans, listening to plants, discussing, changing plans, and marveling. I feel I've learned a good deal about myself and my strengths and limitations, as has Cora. We've tried to learn how to pay attention to the plants and how they want to interact with us. They continue to guide us and show us their unique ways of being in the world. Things looked very different in February when Cora and I first visited Darts. The materials we gathered were mostly last year's spent leaves, winter twigs, and seed heads. As the weeks moved along into spring, new growth and tender green materials began to appear. There seemed to be always something new to explore and get to know. And the light in the garden, that lovely late winter light, was so different in February than when we installed Homage in May. The light continues to change as it flickers over the blanket and wrappings, highlighting different squares on its journey. After exploring a few possible locations for this blanket, we felt pulled to the base of this venerable old cedar tree at the eastern end of the garden. It felt like a fitting place to lay this form of homage. We did expect weather, insects, nature to have a say in what happened to all the various materials over the course of the 3 months duration of the Resplendent exhibition. But we were astonished at how quickly certain colors faded. And once the slugs discovered a favored plant, it didn't take long for certain squares to just disappear, leaving only a telltale trail of silvery slime nearby. Falling tree bits and blown in leaves and fluff have added themselves to the blanket. Our piece seems to be in a very interactive collaboration with the garden. So though change was expected, we now find ourselves wondering if we should just leave the pieces to the whims of nature, or should we interfere with nature and clean, tweak, or replace? Someone visiting the garden in early May and then in mid-June or July will see very different versions of homage. At this point, we are working somewhere in between leaving and tweaking, but there's still another 5 weeks, so please revisit and stay tuned. Partway through the creation of the blanket, we thought about making a second piece to echo the first. As we considered making a tablecloth of sorts, my husband, Don, thanks Don, suggested we could, as an alternative, tie some strands of squares around some trees, thus expanding the original idea. How wonderful it's been to choose certain trees and to get to know them a bit. I think of you, Claire, getting to know some of your materials too, and the tree trunks. We feel we've made some tree friends in the process of hanging strands around their glorious trunks. As well, the tying of plant banners seem to echo the many ancient traditions of tree wrapping. Cora now has some examples of traditional tree wrapping to show you. Take it away, Cora.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Just fine.
In many cultures, trees represent or are considered the divine, sacred living things. With roots reaching toward the underworld and branches reaching toward the sky, many mythologies, from Greco-Roman to Celtic and Druid, stated that the gods themselves took the form of trees. The practice of wrapping trees is a tradition found across religions, geography, and time. The act of wrapping tree trunks or adorning branches in a way that people can honor is a way that people can honor a tree and pay respect to its vitality, power, and presence. In the Japanese Shinto tradition, ropes called shimenawa, often decorated with paper streamers, are tied to trees with the belief that a tree is an object capable of attracting spirits. It is considered that the shimenawa ropes help to attract these spirits, making a tree's sacredness manifest. In the Germanic cultures, there was a pagan reverence for sacred trees. A resultant expression of this, which still lives on today, is the maypole. Believed to have origins with the Finns who had migrated from Siberia, the maypole is a focus of midsummer dances to welcome fertility for livestock, the land, and the people. In Thailand, there is Na Takyan, an ancient female spirit named for the Takyan tree. Found near rivers or streams, she can anthropomorphize, shifting her tree form into that of a slender, long-haired, beautiful young woman wearing a traditional or a long wraparound skirt. And if you note here, there are women's dresses adorning the base of this tree. Naktakan sings mournful songs to beckon wandering men. Those who get too close are drawn into her powerful embrace, eventually subsumed by her branches. Nang Takyan can help you win the lottery, heal, or help with a pregnancy, among other things. The tying on of cloth can both be seen as acts of supplication or acts of thanksgiving. Also in Thailand, Buddhist monks actually blessed and ordained 1,000 trees, wrapping them with the saffron and red colored traditional monks' robes. This was a public recognition of the sacred nature of the trees, which also serve to protect this forest from human destruction. For our artist statement, Jan and I borrowed the words of the Indigenous author and professor, Robin Wall Kimmerer, who wrote in her book, Braiding Sweetgrass. In some native languages, the terms for plants translates to those who take care of us. And in the ancient traditions of tree wrapping, we pay our respect. Jan?
Thanks, Cora. As with the blanket, which wraps the roots of the Western red cedar, we like to imagine that a kind of dialogue has been happening between the trunks and the squares of plant materials wrapped as banners on the trees, as the woven bits seem to fade and blend more and more with their hosts. The wood bugs have enjoyed eating a couple of particularly tasty squares, and we found lovely black beetles resting under a square here and there. And just today, we found these squares at the base of one of the cedar trees. Somebody, I guess, chewed the connections, and there they are. So now they're an offering at the base. We have started and will continue to add additional strands to some of the trees over the course of the exhibition. This is both to augment our initial efforts and to refresh that which has faded or decomposed or been eaten. We're finding that fresh materials change so quickly and that they soon appear as though they've been there a very long time. Throughout these last few months, as we've looked and gathered and tied and knotted, the garden has been ever changing and ever glorious. How fortunate we feel to be welcomed to such an inspiring garden as Dart's Hill. We are humbled and thankful. Thank you. Oh, wait, hold it. This is just in. Breaking news. As of this morning, Willa Downing installed some jewel-like porcelain leaves under the old cedar tree. Some of the leaves seem to have made their way onto the blanket. Willa has been working on these leaves gathered from Dart's garden during her time as artist in residence. Who knows what will happen over the next few weeks? Please visit the garden if you haven't had a chance, or revisit if you've already been. Thanks a lot.
Oh, thank you so much, Jan and Cora, and a special appearance from Willa there too. We have one more presenter this evening, and I'm sorry to say, while we moved heaven and earth, and we talked to each other quite a bit in the background, Elizabeth Carefoot and I had no luck in getting her PowerPoint presentation ready to go. However, you're just going to have to go and take a look, I suppose, and we'll all hear what she has to tell us now. Please go ahead, Elizabeth.
Okay, I had a PowerPoint presentation in the wings, but it's not going to work. However, this is, I don't know whether you can see this, but this is an image, oh dear, of on my iPhone of my installation. Can you see it?
That's not bad.
It's terrible. Anyway, what I did was I made a seed pod out of very shiny silver fabric, which was a bit alien. And around it, I put twigs, and the twigs are opening up and releasing little seeds. So what I was trying to say was that this is a new growth, that seed pods are an extension of life because they renew themselves, the plants renew themselves. And this is, to me, what Dart's garden is. It does continue to renew itself. It's a symbol of fecundity as well, which is so great in this world. I was going to talk about the history of our various things in Dart's, but that's not to be. So I'm going to make this short because I can see that we're nearly out of time. I want to thank Susan Murray from the Dart's Garden Society for allowing me to, even though I am in Victoria, I consider myself the Victorian, hi Susan, I consider myself the Victorian arm of zinc. So I don't know what else to say. My stuff is just gone. I can tell you something about my practice, though. My practice is actually play. It's play and trial and error. I play with clay, paint, and fiber. I consider myself a fiber artist primarily, and my process is totally instinctive. I used to make sketches because I thought that's what all artists did, but I find that my sketches never turn out the way, or my end result never turns out like my sketches. So I've abandoned sketches and I just go for it. I just let the material speak, and when the artwork takes on a life of its own, I just follow where it goes. And that is how I do my practice. So I'm having, can I do a little plug for my next show in Victoria?
I think so.
I
I don't
belong.
see anyone else shaking their head.
I still belong to Zinc, which I'm really grateful for. Zinc has taught me so much. However, oh, my husband's here disappointing me here, just disturbing me. I now belong to Gage Gallery as well. It's an artist collective, and a friend of mine, Laura Felius, and I are having a dual show in the new Gage Gallery in Bastion Square. So if you're ever in Victoria from now to the 18th of July, come visit. And I'm sorry my stuff didn't work. And it's lovely to see all of you. I see all your happy faces. It's great. It's like almost like being there, but not quite.
Well, thank you so much, Elizabeth. Would you hold up, I thought that was good enough for us to see. Would you hold up that on your phone one more time? And can you tell us where in the garden would we get to see this?
Willa very kindly picked the perfect spot. Of course, I could never get there, so I can't see it. But this is the photograph she sent. And I don't know where it is. Willa, do you know where it is? Can you tell us? She's not there.
Go ahead and turn on your mic, Willa.
Oh.
Now we hear you.
Okay, so it's by the pond. There's a bench right at the pond, and it's hanging right over the bench.
Thank you so much, Willa. Now, folks, I realized as I was mentioning the technical difficulties that Elizabeth and I had, I also didn't read you her bio. So let me read you a little introduction to Elizabeth by way of a coda, and then I think we'll go into any questions for the artists. So let me tell you about Elizabeth, now that you've heard from Elizabeth herself, about Elizabeth Carefoot. After graduating from the University of British Columbia with a Bachelor's of Education in Fine Arts, Elizabeth took etching and painting courses at the Emily Carr College of Art and Design and took training as a cine animator with Disney Studios. Through most of her life, Elizabeth has been keenly interested in Middle Eastern culture, history, arts, music, and dance. She trained as a Middle Eastern dancer in Egypt, Syria, the US, and locally, and has performed professionally and taught in that capacity for 30 years. Elizabeth has the need to make stuff. She usually has 2 or 3 different artworks going at once, or like in this case, two or three shows going on at once. If something does not work, she simply layers on a new idea. And she loves it when the work takes on a life of its own. She surrenders to the flow and lets it take her wherever it wants to go. Elizabeth is the recipient of the 2014 Surrey Civic Treasure Award. And thank you so much for putting this up, Claire. We can get a good look at it.
Thank you, Claire. That's very kind.
Now, while we're admiring this, Susan, perhaps you'd like to say a word or two to invite everyone into the question period next.
Hello, everyone. I'm pleased that we've had such excellent attendance this evening, and we've heard some really fabulous talks from our artists tonight. And I encourage you to come and visit the garden when you have a chance. It is looking very, very lovely right now. And I encourage you to ask questions. We have a little bit of time left, and our artists are happy to answer your questions. So please, let's have a few questions. Thank you, Alex.
We might also take a moment to, we might also take a moment to put in a plug for the book. Susan, if you want to tell everyone, I'll put that up.
Okay, Just to let you know that the Dartso Garden Conservancy Trust Society has in 2019 published a book called A Secret Garden, The Story of Dartso Garden Park. And if you'd like to know a little more about the history of the garden, we would encourage you to purchase the book. You can come to our website at dartsil.ca, and you may purchase it online, and then you can pick it up at the garden by appointment. So I would encourage you to do that. It's really wonderfully written and tells some good stories of Mr. and Mrs. Darts and how they developed the garden over 70 years. Thank you, Alex.
Well, we'll now be moving into the period for questions. So artists, please be ready to turn on your microphones, and we invite anyone to take the floor, turn on your microphone, and ask a question of the artists.
My question for all of the artists actually is what you think about the land art movement and whether you have actually been hearing about that and replicated it, or whether you just sort of in synchronicity with it happening fell into the practice from your own practices.
I can speak a little to that. Personally, I have followed many of the pieces over decades for a while, but in 2016, my husband and I did a very large land art project, which was a working veggie garden in Newton that was also had a visual impact. And I've always been really fascinated with, as I said in my talk, just making something that was actually compostable, because I think many artists, after many years of doing anything, end up with rooms full of stuff that they have to deal with unless you're lucky enough to sell everything you make. So I think there's a real appeal of that to make a much lighter footprint.
Okay, thank you. And Jan and Elizabeth, would you like to address that question as well? Elizabeth, I know your work, obviously, because I'm from around Langley, so I know a little bit about the sheep farm and whatnot. So I knew you were very much into the fiber works all the way along, but I hadn't realized that you had moved toward land art as well.
Shall I say, Elizabeth, did you want to speak, Elizabeth? Okay.
She's muted still.
Okay, I'll go ahead then.
Elizabeth, you just turned your mute on, actually, rather than turning your mic back on. You're still turned. There you go, Elizabeth.
Land art. Oh, it's only because of darts that I got into land art. And I like Cora. I really like stuff to go back into the earth. So I've done a lot of interactive with the community, things where I make a framework and the community is encouraged to add pieces to that framework. And when the show is over and the framework is complete, it gets hung up in a tree in the rain and in the weather, and it molders back into the earth. And I really love that process.
Right. I did not know that that was a part of your practice, or I would have been visiting it a long time ago. Thank you.
Jan, did
Well,
you?
I will add just something here. I actually am not familiar with that term land art, but I guess that what I have enjoyed doing for years is working with material that is found from the land, and detritus, I call it, basically. And I really have enjoyed either creating things with that detritus or else just appreciating it for what movement and personality I see in something that is usually discarded and, walked by. So.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'm have noticed in the past year that this particular type of arts practice that sort of bears the name land art is starting since the beginning of the pandemic. It has actually started to get very much more widely known to the general public and much more appreciated by the general public. So yeah, I'm very keen to find out more, of course. So I'll be over at Darts Hill Garden this summer, looking at things and doing things and seeing what's there. Thank you.
Can I say something? I do think that there's behind that land art movement, there are hundreds and hundreds of years of craftspeople who've been using natural materials to make functional objects that that I am in awe of, certainly. Having just played around with ivy for a year, I 100% appreciate what it takes to weave a decent basket. And I'm not anywhere close.
Yeah. I know the feeling. I'm fascinated with this whole concept and idea. I haven't tried it very much myself, other than grubbing around in my, in my own backyard, so to speak. But I've been very encouraged the last year to start experimenting with this, partly by seeing what's been coming out on places like Pinterest and whatnot, where you can follow a lot of it. And now much more so, having seen what you're doing locally here with it, I'm just absolutely awestruck.
The floor is open for more questions, folks. Feel free to turn on your microphone, and if your question is directed at an artist, let them know that, or if it's open.
May I say something to Claire? That Claire, I really love how your piece seems to fit in the garden so well. And I wondered, is it going to stay there? Because it seems like it would be very fitting to do that.
No, it's not. It's not intended to stay there. I've had some people ask about it. As with everything else, I'm really hoping that it will return to the earth at some point. But where exactly it's going to do that, I'm not sure. I would like to put it in a schoolyard so that kids can play. But yeah, I think so much of what we've been talking about resonates with each other. I know Marcus as well has talked extensively about getting to know material and that incredibly sort of humbling process that happens when you start working with natural materials and stay with it for a long time. Yeah.
Do we have any other questions for our artist this evening? We have time for one or two, and then we'll be ready to close our presentation for tonight. So is there one more or two questions? Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to close out the evening. I would like to thank our presenters tonight, Claire and Cora, Jan, Elizabeth, and Willa. I've really, really enjoyed hearing your talks and your interpretation of how you have created art in Darts Hill Garden Park. It's been a lot of fun. This has been the third evening, and I've enjoyed each one greatly. So hey, I look forward to seeing you in the garden soon, and wish you all a beautiful summer. And please, please, everyone, come and visit Darts Hill Garden Park. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. It's been great. Good night.